Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolute most dramatic, high-stakes geopolitical thrillers of the 20th century. Picture this. It's the dawn of the Cold War. The entire globe is violently fracturing into two opposing superpowers. And caught right smack in the middle is a massive, resource-rich nation desperately trying to figure out its place in a totally reshaped world. We are talking about Brazil between 1946 and 1967. And let me tell you, this isn't just your standard history lesson. No, it's a total masterclass in strategy, leverage, and the sheer cost of picking sides.
So how does a rising power actually navigate a world literally split in two? Think about it. If you're Brazil in the mid-20th century, you've got immense potential, right? But you desperately need capital, you need technology, and you definitely need security. Do you just lock arms with the United States and cross your fingers that loyalty pays off? Or do you play it a field, kind of flirting with the entire globe to maximize your own leverage? This right here is the massive dilemma that defined an entire era of Brazilian history. Section 1. Two paradigms of power. The battle for Brazil's diplomatic soul. Okay, let's dive into this.
Because to really get why these presidents made the decisions they did, you first have to understand the rulebook. For decades, Brazil's foreign policy was locked in this absolutely brutal ideological tug-of-war. On one side, you've got Americanism. This is the belief that Brazil's best bet is just strict alignment with the US. Sometimes this was highly ideological, other times it was just pragmatic, calculating that backing Washington would unlock trade and security. But pulling hard in the exact opposite direction is globalism, or universalism. This paradigm is all about pure autonomy. It basically says, hey, why limit ourselves? Let's diversify our global partnerships, talk to literally everyone, and put Brazilian interests way above Cold War loyalties. Keep this ultimate tug-of-war in mind, because as you'll see, the pendulum is going to swing violently back and forth.
Section 2. Alignment without rewards. The Dutra era, 1946 to 1950.
Right, so our story officially kicks off just as the dust of World War II settles and the Cold War freezes over. President Eurico Gaspar Dutra takes the reins, and wow, the pendulum swings hard toward Washington. He is playing the perfect Cold War ally. He eagerly signs the Rio Pact in 1947, locking Brazil right into the U.S. security umbrella. That exact same year, he completely severs diplomatic ties with the Soviet Union. Now, that move was actually driven by domestic anti-communist sentiment, but it definitely signaled his allegiances loud and clear. And then in 1949, he flat out refuses to recognize Communist China at the UN. Brazil was doing literally everything right by Washington's playbook, fully expecting to be showered with massive development funds, kind of like Europe was with the Marshall Plan.
But, well, here's where the heartbreak happens. The United States basically looked at Latin America, deemed it a controlled space, and focused all its money and attention over on Europe and Asia. The U.S. denied the major government loans Brazil so desperately wanted for industrialization. They actually preferred that private investments handle things, and that Brazil just remain an agrarian and extractive economy, literally just mining and farming. It got so bad that by the end of Dutra's term, his chancellor handed the U.S. ambassador a document literally dubbed the Memorandum of Frustration. Think about that. They played the loyal ally, did everything asked of them, and got absolutely next to nothing in return. This crushing disappointment kicks off a totally wild political roller coaster. Just look at these rapid shifts in power. We go from Dutra's strict alignment in 46, straight to Getulio Vargas trying to negotiate a much better deal in 51, then a sudden, sharp pro-US reversal under Café Filo in 55, and bam, right back to developmental nationalism under Juscelino Kubitschek, or JK, in 1956. The political winds in Brazil were shifting at absolute breakneck speed as these leaders just desperately searched for a formula to actually modernize their country.
Section 3. Nationalism and rising frustration, pushing back against Washington.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how Vargas and JK decided it was time to really flex Brazil's muscles. Since strict loyalty clearly wasn't paying the bills, they figured they had to force Washington's hand through economic nationalism. And these moves, they were incredibly bold for the 1950s. Vargas goes right ahead and creates Petrobras, establishing a strict state monopoly on oil exploration, which, as you can guess, massively annoyed U.S. investors. He also rolled out rules tightly limiting how much profit foreign companies could send back home. And then there's JK, who famously and dramatically just broke off negotiations with the International Monetary Fund in 1959. These presidents were essentially practicing what we'd call a negotiated alignment. They're still siding with the U.S. globally, sure, but they are fighting fiercely for Brazilian economic autonomy at home.
But unfortunately, Brazil hits another massive brick wall. JK's grand foreign policy initiative, Operation Pan America, which was basically a huge plea for U.S. investment in the region to stave off poverty and communism, met with a completely, totally cold response from Washington. So what do you do when your primary partner keeps leaving you on read? Well, you start looking elsewhere. Brazil starts eyeing Latin American trade blocs like ALLC and even begins setting up commercial ties with Eastern Europe. The seed of that globalism paradigm we talked about earlier, it had officially been planted.
Section 4. The Independent Pivot. The Radical Shift of Jânio Quadros, 1961. All right, by 1961, all that simmering frustration finally boils over. President Jânio Quadros takes office and basically decides, you know what, the Americanism paradigm is dead. It was time for the independent foreign policy. And the brilliant architect of this incredible pivot was Chancellor Afonso Arinos. Under this new policy, Brazil realized there was this whole other world out there rapidly breaking free from colonialism. So Arinos pioneers this brand new Africanism strategy. He completely restructured the diplomatic corps, created a dedicated Africa division, personally visited Senegal, and made history by appointing Raimundo de Souza Dantas as Brazil's first ever black ambassador. They were actively, loudly signaling that Brazil was an independent, global player, not just some pawn in Washington's backyard.
But, oh man, they didn't stop at Africa. Quadros and his administration started unapologetically flirting with the entire globe. They actively restored ties with Eastern Europe, and in a move that literally caused jaws to drop in Washington, Vice President João Goulart actually traveled to communist China. No way, right? They also signed major agreements with neighboring Argentina to prioritize Latin American unity. For Brazil, this was just pure pragmatism. It was diversification. But for the United States, who was deep, deep in the paranoia of the Cold War, this looked like a terrifying slide straight toward the enemy.
Section 5. The Cold War Climax. João Goulart's Dangerous Game.
The tension quickly turns into a full-blown, high-stakes crisis when Jânio Quadros unexpectedly resigns. This leaves Vice President João Goulart to take over as president. And Goulart, he pushes the globalism paradigm to its absolute limit, triggering an escalating diplomatic war. When Goulart completely reestablishes ties with the Soviet Union in 1961, Washington reacts with severe concern over his reformist discourse. When Brazil abstains from kicking Cuba out of the OAS, the U.S. sends Attorney General Robert Kennedy down to apply direct pressure. And when U.S. companies start getting expropriated locally without payment, Washington goes as far as secretly preparing a U.S. naval fleet codenamed Brother Sam. Every single independent move was met with a massive countermove.
Yet despite all that intense heat, Brazil's diplomats still managed to deliver what is arguably the absolute peak manifesto of their independent stance. At the UN in 1963, Brazil proudly championed the 3 Ds: disarmament, decolonization, and development. They were basically standing up and telling the superpowers, look, stop fighting, stop colonizing, and let the rest of the world develop. It was a breathtakingly bold stance for a developing nation to take on the global stage.
But unfortunately, that bold stance just couldn't survive the brutal realities of Cold War geopolitics. Domestically, conservative forces in the military viewed Goulart's independent moves and his domestic reforms as a direct gateway to communism. So, in 1964, a civil-military coup overthrows Goulart. As the historical sources outline, this coup had the clear backing of U.S. officials, including Ambassador Lincoln Gordon, and the new military regime was swiftly recognized by U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson. Just like that, the grand independent foreign policy experiment was violently shut down.
Section 6. The Pendulum Swings Back. Castelo Branco, 1964 to 1967. Let's move to and see how this builds.
Because now, the pendulum doesn't just swing back, it literally slams back into place. Under the new military president, Castelo Branco, Brazil completely and utterly abandons the globalism paradigm. The new government adopted this concept of concentric circles that placed the United States dead center. The return to strict alignment was absolute. Brazil immediately severed diplomatic ties with Cuba. When the U.S. decided to militarily intervene in the Dominican Republic in 1965, Brazil didn't just applaud from the sidelines, they actively supported it. And economically, Brazil's financial leaders perfectly aligned their policies with whatever Washington expected.
And if you need a single sentence to summarize the total victory of the Americanism paradigm in this era, it is this infamous quote from Castelo Branco's chancellor, Juraci Magalhães. He stated publicly, "What is good for the U.S. is also good for Brazil." I mean, that is the ultimate mic drop on an era of independent diplomacy right there. The whole dream of a purely autonomous, neutral Brazil was shelved, replaced once again by the harsh binaries of the Cold War. Which leaves us with a profound question to end this explainer on. In a fiercely divided world, what is the ultimate price a nation pays when it trades its autonomy for alignment? Is it better to pick a side and guarantee your security, or risk absolutely everything to stand on your own 2 feet? Brazil tried both, and the consequences reshaped the nation forever. So, what do you think? I really want to know. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that like button if you found this breakdown helpful, and as always, keep learning. Catch you in the next explainer.